Hello and welcome. You're watching Arirang News, coming to you live from Seoul. I'm Kwon Jang-ho, and it's good to have you with us. We're just days away from a pivotal US midterm elections, one set to be the biggest test for Trump's presidency to date. We'll be looking at some of the possible outcomes and what it could mean for the Trump administration and how it affects the situation on the Korean Peninsula as well. That's all coming up later, but first we catch up on the latest headlines with Devin waiting at the News Center. Devin?
Hi, Jong-un. The leaders said they'd do this at the summit back in September, and now the two Koreas have agreed to tell the International Olympic Committee together of their intent to co-host the Summer Olympics in 2032. Delegations from Seoul and Pyongyang, including their vice ministers of sports, agreed today to do that when they met at the Joint Liaison Office just north of the border. They've also decided to field joint teams for next year's World Handball Championship and for the 2020 Tokyo Olympics. And to do that, they're kickstarting consultations with the IOC and related organizations. Each side also promised to take part in international sporting events co-hosted by the other and to continue exchanges like friendly matches in various sports. In the meantime, the two Koreas have been drawing down weapons along the border. But Friday morning, South Korea's defense ministry confirmed that the North has not closed one of its 4 gun ports near the maritime border in the West Sea. The ministry sent a message to the North asking that it be closed. A ministry official told reporters that North Korea responded that the matter will be dealt with after it's reported to higher authorities. The two Koreas had agreed in September to cease all hostile acts on land, sea, and air starting November 1st. That includes covering up artillery guns and closing all gun ports near the sea border. But as of Thursday, of the North's 4 gun ports near Yeonpyeong-do Island, 1 was closed, 1 was open, and the other 2 couldn't be seen because of vegetation. South Korea's presidential office says it's flexible when it comes to the timing of North Korean leader Kim Jong-un's visit to Seoul. That's according to a high-ranking official speaking Thursday under the condition of anonymity. He said that inter-Korean agreements, including the easing of military tensions near the border, are being carried out just as planned. And when it comes to Kim visiting Seoul, as he's promised to do, the official said it does not depend on the timing of the next summit between Kim and President Trump. Trump's national security advisor, John Bolton, had said that the second Kim-Trump summit won't happen until early next year. The United Nations First Committee, which handles disarmament and international security, passed 3 resolutions on Thursday calling for North Korea's denuclearization. One resolution was motioned by Australia. It condemns North Korea's nuclear tests and calls for the regime's complete, verifiable, and irreversible denuclearization. It also demands that the North comply with UN Security Council resolutions and emphasizes the need for diplomatic efforts on the nuclear issue. The other 2 resolutions, sponsored by Japan, urge the North to totally eliminate its nuclear arms and call for a nuclear-free society. South Korea voted in favor of Australia's motion, but abstained from Japan's because they were not in South Korea's interests. A new report from Human Rights Watch claims that high-ranking North Korean officials are sexually abusing women with impunity. Kim Mo-gyun reports.
Sexual violence by high-ranking officials appears to be endemic in North Korea. That's according to a report released by the UN-based Human Rights Watch on Thursday. The 86-page report, which contains interviews and testimonies from North Korean women, claimed that unwanted sexual contact and sexual violence are so common under the regime that they are part of women's daily lives.
Many North Koreans told Human Rights Watch that when an official or a person in power picks a woman, she has no choice but to comply. She has to do whatever he demands, whether it's for sex, money, or other favors.
The Human Rights Watch said the North Korean government should acknowledge the problem of sexual violence, ensure that police, prosecutors, and courts treat sexual violence as a crime, and promptly investigate and prosecute allegations when appropriate. North Korea strongly rejected the report, calling the allegations trite and fictitious. The North Korean delegation to the UN in Geneva issued a statement the following day, which said that the report is a futile attempt by some dishonest and hostile forces who feel uneasy with the ongoing trend towards peace, reconciliation, prosperity, and cooperation on the Korean Peninsula. Kim Mo-gyun, Arirang News.
The past several weeks have been a wild ride in South Korean stocks. Just a few days ago, the country's main stock index saw its biggest on-month drop in 10 years. Now the head of the Bank of Korea says the volatility could become even more severe in the near future. Ko Ryun-hee reports.
Speaking at a financial council meeting on Friday, Bank of Korea Governor Ju-yeol said the country might face increased financial market volatility due to high uncertainties abroad. Governor Lee met with local bank heads in Seoul and said the central bank will closely monitor the financial situations in foreign countries and cooperate with the South Korean government if necessary. He mentioned the recent activity on the local benchmark Kospi, which showed a positive turnaround this week after falling by almost 14% in October, its largest on-month decline since 2008. October was a brutal month for investors around the world as all major indices on Wall Street fell due to fears over slowing growth, trade wars, and higher interest rates. The Nasdaq tumbled around 9% in October, the biggest monthly drop in a decade. Although the pain spread to overseas markets, including South Korea, Governor Lee stressed the market movement was different to past financial jitters because interest rate and currency fluctuations were limited. He said South Korea continues to log a current account surplus and foreign investors' confidence in the South Korean economy remains strong. Ko Ryun-hee, Arirang News.
U.S. President Donald Trump and his Chinese counterpart Xi Jinping have held what Trump says was, quote, a long and very good phone conversation about their trade conflict. Trump also said the two leaders discussed North Korea. Lee Seung-jae reports.
A glimmer of hope for a thaw in the trade dispute between the world's two biggest economies. President Trump took to Twitter on Thursday, saying he had a long and very good conversation with his Chinese counterpart Xi Jinping. He added they discussed many subjects with a heavy emphasis on trade. With the G20 summit to be held in Argentina this month, the two leaders are expected to meet on the sidelines. While watchers don't expect any major breakthrough, President Trump said the talks were moving along nicely. After the phone call, President Xi said he and Trump hope to expand trade cooperation, adding they would promote a plan that the two sides can accept to reach a consensus on the current trade issue. The two countries have already imposed tariffs on hundreds of billions of dollars of each other's goods. President Trump has also threatened to slap tariffs on the remainder of China's $500 billion+ exports to the U.S. Trump's economic advisor, Larry Kudlow, says the administration will be holding off on further tariffs on China and may scale back existing ones if talks on a new trade relationship are successful. While Kudlow declined to provide details on the Trump-Xi phone discussion, he said there was a very positive tone between the two leaders. President Trump's mention of a good discussion on North Korea is also being viewed as positive in South Korea, but no further information was available on what the two leaders discussed on that front. Lee Seung-jae, Arirang News.
I'm Devin Whiting, and those are your news headlines.
The last push to win votes before the crucial U.S. midterm elections is taking place this weekend. Polls are showing a close race for both the House and the Senate, the results of which are set to shape the remaining 2 years of U.S. President Donald Trump's first term in office. Noah Ram takes a look at how things are shaping up for both parties.
Opinion polls suggest Democrats are favourites to win the House, while Republicans may maintain control of the Senate. According to a Washington Post Shah School poll, across 69 congressional districts identified as competitive in late August, 50% of likely voters support the Democratic candidate, while 46% support the Republican. The Post says the 4 percentage point difference is superficial given the poll's 3.5 percentage point margin of error. However, it notes the finding marks a sharp turn from 2016, when voters in these districts backed Republicans by a margin of 15 percentage points. The paper suggests that with 63 of the battleground districts held by Republicans, that kind of shift in sentiment would be sufficient for Democrats to take control of the House. The hurdle the Democrats face, meanwhile, is voter turnout. The party is usually dogged by low turnout and is at greater risk of falling short of what the candidates in competitive races might need to win. In terms of campaigns, two main issues are at the forefront of voters' minds. The Democratic Party is focusing its campaign on healthcare, while the GOP is betting on Trump's harsh rhetoric on immigration to motivate conservative voters. According to CNN, more than 23 million ballots have been cast already in early voting, and the rest of the American public will go to the polls next Tuesday. All 435 seats in the House are up for grabs, as well as 35 seats in the Senate and 39 governorships. Noaram, Arirang News.
For a further breakdown of this situation, we have with us Professor Song Se-ryun from Kyung University. Thank you for coming on the show today.
Good to be here.
So I don't think it's too much of a cliche to say that this is one of the biggest tests of the Trump presidency, and I think the American public know it as well. Early voting we've seen so far is almost twice that of the 2014 elections as well. I mean, how do you see these elections?
Well, this is a very interesting election. Traditionally, you would have said that midterm election is traditionally a referendum for whoever is in the White House. It's a bad news for the ruling party because the voters seek to kind of counterbalance what has been going on. And it's an early indication of what might happen in the subsequent presidential election. But this time around, a lot of dynamics have been changed. For example, the voter turnout is a very high in this election. And that, I think, is owed to the fact that Donald Trump has been a very polarizing figure. He has been divisive in terms of how he rallies his own faction, but at the same time exclude the other parties and the other sentiments. But in terms of dynamics of having a fight, it is a good news because in terms of having a good fight, you need to have a clear side that's separated by the two with some distance. So in that sense, I think that this time around, it's going to be more fierce in terms of how each liberal and conservative, the factions will push for their agenda. I think that in terms of predictions, I'll go with the popular predictions, but I think that it's going to be a very fierce fight.
You just mentioned their predictions. I mean, latest polls suggest that the Democrats are favourite to win their House back, while the Republicans are to keep hold of the Senate. That's what the poll is saying. But as we've seen in recent years, polls can be very wrong. I mean, do you have some sort of prediction for these? I mean, when you look at these polls, what do you see?
That is true. That's what happened in 2016. It went against the popular prediction of who's going to win. But there was a electoral college dynamics that has seeped in to influence that. But at this point, if you just look at the popularity figures, President Trump is about 41%. And they're thinking that all the House of Representatives seat is up for re-election, all 435 of them. Probably you can see that 41% might hold. That means that's going to be working in favor of the Democrats. But on the Senate side, the dynamics are different. Only 35 of the seat is up for re-election, and out of 35, only 9 seats are on the Republican incumbents. And with it 9, only 2 of them are kind of the toss-up states. And on the Democrat side, there are 1 seat expected to kind of turn red at this point to the Republicans, and 3 more are toss-up states. So if you look at it that way, dynamics are clearly in favor of the Republicans on the Senate side. So in that sense, it works out to be Senate to Republicans and House of Representatives to the Democrats.
Yes, as you said, it is going to be very interesting to see what happens. And as you said, this kind of divisive figure at least gets people out to come voting and to care about these kind of elections again, because sometimes midterms can be quite quiet. But of course, let's look at further away now as well, because these results of the elections, of course, normally they're it's a domestic issue, but I think this time as well, there are many other countries looking at these elections as well with a keen interest. Let's start with South Korea here first. What do you think Seoul and the South Korean government, the South Korean people, will be looking at from these elections?
Well, I think we're a little bit conflicted. If you look at the Korean economic side of it, we're an export-driven country, so we have been doing well in the era of a globalization and the rule-based system of free trade. Donald Trump is not about those actions. He is going against the institutions that the international institutions that the United States have established. So in that sense, Korea, I think that the Chinese sentiment would be pretty similar, that it would be better for economic sense to have a better check from the Congress. So that means flipping the Congress in both, or at least one of them might help. But on the other hand, another priority is to have a good result in the North Korean matters. That goes to whether Donald Trump has a better leeway to conduct his foreign policy matters. In that sense, from that viewpoint, probably South Korea does not want Donald Trump to lose big.
You talked about the North Korea issue there. Let's move on to that. So Trump, he put off the possible second summit with Kim Jong-un until after the midterm elections. That's what he said, because he said he'd be too busy before then.
Right.
So how do you think this, the results of this election will affect how he now goes ahead with North Korea?
In one sense, it would not matter that much. Traditionally, American presidents have more foreign policy power than others, domestic issues. So whatever happens in the Congress might not affect him too much. Besides, his style has been that he would not really care what other people would say. But at the same time, though, if he is too bogged down by the congressional investigations into many different matters, probably that would keep him too busy in domestic issues to look for his way out in the foreign policy matters. But another dynamics is that there's not much urgency at this point. I mean, we once speculated that he would push for the North Korean diplomacy matters because of the midterm elections, but that is not an issue at this point. So in that sense, he would more focus on how he can win on this, so focusing on the negotiation dynamics of it, under which probably waiting game might be one of the cards that he would have. And probably what would drive him further after the midterm election is the re-election in 2 years. So if you look at that time frame, there's no real urgency there. So he'll try to keep his promise. He'll try to have a legacy of the peacemaker in the world. So he would push forward, but in terms of how much he would push forward and how fast he would do, probably he's at a good position to kind of wait it out if he wants to.
He could wait it out, but there are some people, some critics who have concerns that say if Trump does lose and gets bogged down by domestic issues, he might try to force a win on international issues, specifically with North Korea as well, and that he might push for become even more hardball with North Korea, risking further ire with and further tension with North Korea. Do you think these concerns have merit?
I think it has a merit. I think that Europe is thinking the same thing. They want to have a better rule-based system kind of restored. So probably European countries want Donald Trump to lose, but not too big, because if he loses too big, like I said, American presidents have more leeway in foreign policy matters. So in order to win, if he cannot win in the domestic matters, he might kind of give more attention and more thrust to the foreign policy matters. So in that sense, it'll flip the argument the other way. You're absolutely right. So in that sense, I think the result is important, but how much of a result it comes out would be kind of a subtle but important factor.
Of course, not just North Korea and South Korea, but also China will be keeping a close watch on these election results as well. What's interesting, though, is actually just the other day, just Thursday, Trump and Xi Jinping, the Chinese leader, held a phone call together where they discussed trade and North Korea as well. What does it say about the fact that these two leaders found time to have this phone conversation just a few days before these crucial elections?
Well, the suspicion is that Donald Trump was using China, by vilifying China, he's kind of rallying his own factions. It's China's fault, so to speak. So after the midterm election, whatever the result is, China might expect that trade war might lose its kind of motivation from Donald Trump's part. And if the Congress is flipped one way at both sides, probably they'll want more of a check and balances on the foreign policy and the economic policy. So in that sense, there would be kind of a pivoting towards more of a free trade sentiment on it. So I think that Donald Trump would not mind too much of that kind of movement in that small scales. So in that sense, Donald Trump and Xi Jinping probably is not really at the loggerhead after the midterm election.
As I said, they talked about North Korea as well. I mean, what do you think the message is from this phone call? What would they have talked about North Korea right now? Because things have not moved much in the last couple of months.
Right. And Donald Trump has always urged China to play the bigger role. At this point, Donald Trump is well advised to stick to his rhetoric of looking for a complete, kind of verifiable result. But at the same time, he'll play his politics by pushing China more, but at the same time looking for a role from the South Korea to play the mediator role as it had, so that the negotiation dynamics will continue. So in that sense, I think that the Xi Jinping might be hearing kind of two different messages from Donald Trump. One is, we want your cooperation, but at the same time, he's scolding China's tactics.
Now let's, finally, before we go, so immediately after the midterm elections, it seems like Pompeo, his Secretary of State, will be meeting with North Korean counterparts in the US, and that's
right.
what he's been saying. What's interesting, though, is as well, because when Trump put off the summit with Kim Jong-un after the midterm elections, we thought there might be some working level talks or senior level talks happening between the US and North Korea during that time as well. But in fact, North Korea seems to have stalled and kept delaying it until after these midterm elections. Do you think the North Koreans are also looking at these midterm elections and trying to see what way the results go and see how they can use that to their advantage as well?
Absolutely. The North Korea, for a time being, has been looking at the situation as an intense game of chess that played out on a negotiation table. That's why they pulled in China, that's why they're meeting Russia, that's why they're looking at intensely what the domestic situation is for Donald Trump, so that they can gauge the strength and weaknesses of Donald Trump. So midterm election gives, one way or the other, how much he is being powered by his parties in the Congress, or he's going to be bogged down to an extent by what's happening in the Congress. So I think what happens in the midterm election is of great interest domestically to Donald Trump, but to North Korea, to see what kind of weakness they can exploit, or what kind of tactics they could have in furthering the negotiation with the United States.
I mean, but what could some of those tactics be? I mean, depending on the situation, does it really affect how North Koreans plan to negotiate?
For example, midterm election, there was a period of time when North Korea potentially had a message to Donald Trump. Donald Trump, by having a good result, we can help you in winning the midterm election or influence the midterm election. That's gone, but we have a re-election coming up next time, and also his legacies and whatever happens at the domestic scene, North Korea could look for an opportunity to help out or scratch Donald Trump's back. It seems like it's an apt metaphor for those people who are engaged in kind of mob tactics so far, and their style has been pretty similar in terms of how to provoke certain tensions and easing the tensions. So in that sense, that kind of, if you look at it, a dance probably would resume as soon as they try figure out what kind of tunes they are dancing to.
Well, that's all we have time for. Thank you for coming in, Professor Song, and it's always great to get your insights.
Thank you.
Now that brings us to the end of this newscast, but I'll be back on Monday, and next week we here at Arirang News will of course be following all the build-up and the results of the US midterm elections, so hope you can join us then. Thank you for watching for now, and hope you have a great weekend. Goodbye.
Overseas TV Audience Survey. Arirang TV and Gallup Korea are conducting